Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast for film fans by film fans. Every episode we look at films old and new to choose what should be preserved for all time in our movie vault. With lively topics, big questions and crazy challenges to entertain us and our guests, we always look to have fun by giving you the topics worth discussing and the movies worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a preview of what to expect in today's episode.
Yeah, stick him in the Shrek's Adventure, stick him in the Maze of Insanity, which, if you don't know because it got erased, is a hall of mirrors in the Shrek Adventure where, when I was there, a child got lost and it was implied to be a regular occurrence. Not permanently lost, they found him like a few minutes later, but it was long enough for me to panic that I would never leave the Maze of Insanity.
And that kid grew up to be an article writer for The Guardian, and he vowed to have his revenge.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? I am your father. Wait! Here's Johnny. I'll be back.
It's not the guitar, it's a silly movie boy!
Well, good movies!
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the topics worth discussing and the movies worth watching. I am your host, David Osger, and I am joined, as ever, by our very own layered onion, Craig MacDonald. Hello, Craig.
Yep, I knew that was coming. Yeah, very good.
That's all right then. I did have a backup prepared, in case, cakes have layers.
In case that wasn't offensive enough.
In case you just said you didn't like onions. I would have just come back with cakes have layers.
All right, you twig. Anyway.
How have you been? Obviously, I won't say the word, but it's starting to open up a bit more out there at the moment. It's starting to return to normality in some ways.
I mean, it's going well. I have the use of my arm back, which is always nice.
Craig's had the 5G. No.
Don't spread conspiracies, for the love of God. We have a podcast, we have social responsibility. Don't put the message out there.
I would hope that my joking attitude would say that I don't believe in that. Recently, I don't know if you've seen this, especially because you often see memes and stuff like that, but I know you still haven't seen Invincible, right?
I haven't, no.
No. Have you seen, the Think Mark Think memes?
Oh, I've seen the meme format to death.
I was like, he must have seen this meme format. So, one, that's a reason to watch Invincible, but that's also just been giving me major Craig vibes. I'm just watching it like, that is Craig and me. We were talking earlier about, our friendship. That's essentially Craig to me. Just think, David, think. So,
basically what you're saying is, last year, one of your previous birthdays, I got you our own version of the woman screaming of the cat meme. So for your next birthday, it's Think, David, Think.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Great. I'll tick that off the list.
Jot that down. Also joining us today is, forget Julie Andrews, we have our own queen of Far, Far Away. It is Kelly Bishop. Hello, Kelly.
Hi there, loves. How are we doing?
We're doing good. Kelly, as always, as expected, there's a big contrast of films in your life at the moment. I've seen from your recent watches, you've had the absolute one end of the scale, which is Promising Young Woman, and then the absolute other end of the scale, which is Scoob. I just have to ask.
Why did you make that? Why is that a double bill that you put yourself through?
It was actually a triple bill. I watched Promising Young Woman twice in one day, which was quite intense on my brain. So I was like, I need something to just not think. So we did Scoob. And then, I don't know if you scrolled down a little bit further, I then watched High School Musical 1 and 2.
Oh, wow, okay.
We did the whole shebang.
That's definitely a mood to get away from the earlier feelings. No, I saw Anastasia pop up there, so I thought oh, okay, we got some Disney stuff going on, semi-Disney kind of now, going on as well.
Yeah, I can't have anyone in my life who hasn't seen Anastasia. It's one of those films that crops up from my childhood over and over again. So inducting everyone into the little Anastasia bubble.
Well, if people at home haven't guessed from, my introductions and just the title of the episode, today we are talking all about Shrek as it's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. So we're going to discuss the first and second movies along with their legacy. So who better to join us on this episode than somebody who has actually written a book about Shrek and about Dreamworks. It is Dr. Sam Summers. He is the Associate Lecturer in Animation at Middlesex Uni. self-titled Shrekspert, and one of the hosts of the Disneyversity podcast. Hello, Sam.
Hello.
How are you? Welcome to All Good Movies. Thank you for joining us.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm all right. It's still actually sunny outside, so that's good enough for me. I mean, I'm inside, but you know, it brings the mood up a bit, doesn't it?
And well, this is kind of like your semi first time on here, because of course you did lend us your kind words for our theme park episode, in which I can say that, you know, I'm sure I echo Kelly here and saying, like, you know, thank you for being kind to my Run Llama Run ride and Kelly's Todayland ride. Can't say the same maybe for Steve's Chicken Little ride, but I don't think we were going to disagree with you on that one. So thank you for giving us the gift, which was your not praiseworthy feelings of the film Chicken Little, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the ride concept was okay, but I do not like that movie. It's a bad movie. It's probably the worst, like, mainstream Disney animated feature.
Yeah.
The only other possible contender for me is Dinosaur. It's those two, but I think Chicken Little takes it handily.
If anybody wondering, this is why Steve isn't on this episode. He couldn't cope with the flashbacks. No, I'm joking. Yeah, no, that it was great having your feedback at that time. And like you said, the ride was fun, but we were all just thinking the same thing. We were like, what are you doing, Steve? Why? So I was just glad that you had that feedback for me to be like, okay, I can ease us into our feelings through Sam's. But
yeah, I don't want anyone's feelings to be hurt, apart from those involved in the production of the movie Chicken Little. Zach Braff in particular, if he's listening, he should be ashamed of himself. But, you know, fans of the movie, that's fine. You like what you like, I guess.
An early glimpse into what your future Disneyversity episode about Chicken Little will be.
Can't wait.
And interesting you mentioned Dinosaur, actually, because that one's, it's like different with the UK and US, actually, isn't it? Like, in terms of the list.
So
that's a whole nother can of worms. I'm sorry, I should have opened it.
Dinosaur, when it came out, was not part of it wasn't like a numbered Disney animated classic or whatever they call it, because it was CGI. So they were like, oh, this is the numbers are just for the 2D hand-drawn movies. But then when they made Chicken Little, I think they retroactively thought, oh, well, we can incorporate Dinosaur. But then actually, I think Dinosaur is in both the US and the UK lists. The discrepancy is that in the US, they have the Winnie the Pooh sequel from 2011, and instead in the UK we have The Wild, which is a massive disparity in quality. You know, like, there's various reasons I'm glad that I live in the UK versus the US, but The Wild being in the Disney canon box set is not one of them.
Yeah, that on my shelf when I was trying to collect all the films, I'm always just like looking at that one, just like, why are you there? Why?
Yeah, I would give up my socialized healthcare and relative safety from gun violence just to get Winnie the Pooh back in that box set.
As I mentioned before, I should clarify, you've written a book about Shrek. It's more of an academic text, so more for your sort of like students, people who are doing film theory, animation, as you teach. So it's called Dreamworks Animation, Intertextuality and Aesthetics in Shrek and Beyond. So yeah, Sam, tell us all about this book, which, like I said, will perfectly justify why you were on today's episode.
So the main premise of the book is that Dreamworks, and in particular the movie Shrek, made like a really decisive intervention into the history of the animated feature, and obviously the computer animated feature in particular, through their use of intertextual techniques, things like casting very famous film stars, things like jokes that reference pop culture, using well-known pop songs on the soundtrack and stuff like that, and playing very overtly with genre as well. So if you look at the history of the mainstream American animated feature, you can see bits of these kinds of techniques popping up most prominently in something like Aladdin maybe. But the idea of the book is that because DreamWorks and especially Shrek became so popular at an early period in the evolution of the computer animated feature, that ended up codifying people's assumptions around what the computer animated feature could be, and led to those aesthetic techniques being taken on by all the other new computer animation studios that were popping up. And most of the book is analysing the use of those techniques in DreamWorks' films.
Yes, it's definitely an interesting one when you, like you said, especially when you look at it years later. And, you know, even at the time, I think even as like a kid and stuff, you watch Shrek being like, oh, you know, like because Disney was such a big thing, part of your childhood, etc. So from that vein, especially because you do a Disney podcast as well. So did you approach it more of a find it interesting how DreamWorks is, you know, the opposite to Disney, or do you sort of have a big history with the DreamWorks films as well? You know, what's your relationship with Disney and DreamWorks in that way of sort of memories, childhood, that kind of stuff?
Oh, I mean, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I think I was just the right age for Shrek when it came out. I was born in 92. And I'll be asking you guys when you were born later, because I think that's really important to your relationship with Shrek. But I was born in 92, which means that I was 9 when Shrek came out, which is perfect. But it also means I was a little bit too old by the time we got to that next wave, like Shark Tale, like Kung Fu Panda and Over the Hedge and stuff like that, that kind of later wave in the mid to late noughties of DreamWorks movies. So I was much more a Disney kid and like a Pixar kid as well. And those movies are more consistent, especially the ones that I grew up with, like the first wave of Pixar movies and the like Disney 90s Renaissance movies. They are better than DreamWorks' output, like overall, film for film, 100%, right? But one of the reasons why the book is about DreamWorks is because it's based on my PhD thesis, as many first academic books are. They're based on the person's PhD thesis, because you basically have to write a book to get a PhD. And for your PhD, you have to make an original contribution to knowledge. So basically, you have to be studying something that's never been studied before. So it was, all right, okay, boom, let's do this, because there's loads of stuff out there in Disney, loads of stuff out there on Pixar, very, very little out there on DreamWorks, and certainly not a full study of every film that they've made, comparing them to each other and looking at what they brought to animation that no one else was bringing to the table. So that's kind of why I found the niche, and that was a while ago, and I'm still in the niche. When did I start my PhD? That was like 2014, I think. Yeah. So I'm still, 6 years later, I'm still in the niche. I'm hoping to put a cap on Shrek with the anniversary year. I've got a few other Shrek-related projects for later in the year coming up, and then after that, it's like, no, Shrek is, I'm over with Shrek. I've said everything I can say about it.
Yeah, isn't it like, are you doing like a symposium on it as well? It was just like, so there's a lot of Shrek. We're just adding to that list now.
Yeah, we're doing I'm organising an online symposium, which is sort of a symposium which normally happens in person, is a conference where different academics come from all over and present on a particular topic. And often the papers from a symposium get compiled into a book as well, which is what I'm hoping to do. So that'll be the last thing on Shrek, will be this compilation of Shrek essays from other authors that I'm hoping to put together. So look out for that. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll get details of the Shrek Symposium, because I'm hoping to make it fairly publicly accessible since it's online. So if that's something that sounds fun, or if you're an academic and you'd like to present at the Shrek conference, then yeah, drop me an email.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, if you're writing, you know, a dissertation on Shrek or anything, perfect time to like go, you know, get the book and join the symposium. Because on Twitter as well, like your picture on there. So does it mean, did you have to like go through like Home and Boss Baby and everything in terms of watching those, comparing them?
Yeah, I've seen every single one. So my profile picture on Twitter is me with the book lying on a bed of DVDs. It's every DVD of a DreamWorks movie, which I own. I stopped after the PhD, so I've seen Kung Fu Panda 3, but I never bought it. And I haven't seen Abominable yet, which they brought out a couple of years ago. I think that's the only one I haven't seen. But I dropped 16 quid to watch Trolls World Tour when that came out at the start of the pandemic.
One of those. So I was saying about The Wild being on my shelf earlier, but there must be a few DreamWorks ones on yours which you're just like, oh, why is that there?
Oh, it's worse than that, man. My DVD shelf is, I'm just looking at it right now, it's next to where I am. It's like pushing like 400 animation DVDs. Like I've just got everything that's ever been released. Yeah, there's some rough stuff on that shelf, I'll tell you. DreamWorks is not the worst of it.
Well, respect to that. Respect to that. Like, yeah, because thinking back, because some of them, like I said, there's loads I haven't seen, but I remember like trying to watch like Peabody and Sherman, and I was like, I can't do this. I just like turned it off.
And that's nowhere near the worst. What's the worst? Shark Tale's the worst. Shark Tale is the worst. Shrek 3 is exceedingly poor. Well, I don't like Boss Baby very much. I don't like his attitude. I don't like what he represents. Home is okay. B-movie is an interesting one. Like, you've got to watch B-movie. That's like, I always say that I give that question mark out of 10 because it's like, it's very unique and at times very funny, but it's not great. It's a weird one. It's hard to evaluate.
So I have never seen the B movie. I have, however, read the entire script because a friend of mine had some friends get on a Facebook, and as a joke, they posted the entire script of the B movie as a status. And I was on the bus coming home from London, so I thought I might as well just read this. It was a wild script.
That became a meme. Yeah, I've got that on a T-shirt actually, or I used to, because it's in a very, very small font. So when you've had the T-shirt and you've washed it a few times, it becomes unreadable. But I do have that on a T-shirt somewhere. You need to watch B-movie, and then you need to watch B-movie the DVD commentary, which is wild because it was written by and starring and produced by Jerry Seinfeld, and it's Jerry Seinfeld and some of the directors, the people who actually worked on the movie, and like one of Jerry Seinfeld's like old writer buddies, like not Larry David, but a Larry David kind of guy, just like this grouchy old New York Jewish guy. And they've never seen the finished movie before, Seinfeld and his mates. So they're constantly saying things like, there's a lot more orange here than I was expecting. Why is it so orange? Couldn't you find another color? And it's just really awkward with the animators sitting there with them watching it. So that's one of my favorite DVD commentaries.
I think all I've seen is just those like videos and memes you get of like the B movie being weird as hell for nearly 8 minutes straight and things like that, which you're just watching it and you're just watching the deterioration of the planet because the bees are no longer making honey, etc.
The bee falls in love with a human woman. Like the bee has a human love interest, and we'll never explore the physical implications of that, but it's suggested, it's hinted at.
Kelly, have you ever seen a bee and thought, you know what, maybe?
Absolutely not. But I have looked at bees before and thought, have they sued the human race? Who knows? Because that's like the weirdest, like the relationship with the lady is weird. Them just deciding not to make honey anymore, weird. Him actually going to court and suing the human race is possibly like just the icing on the cake.
Yeah. You might be thinking this sounds like 4 different movies, and that's what it watches like as well. Yeah. There's a whole courtroom drama segment in the middle of it. It turns into A Few Good Men for a minute. It's bizarre. I
also just remember seeing footage of it. There's also a B Larry King, and they point out they also have a human Larry King. And he's like, I know nothing about that. I'm just B Larry King. What's going on?
I write about that at some length in the book, actually, B. Larry King, and he always pops up in my lectures because that's interesting to me because that's a trope that DreamWorks brought in with Shrek 2 and with Shark Tale, like versions of celebrities that fit into the world of that movie. So you've got like in Shark Tale, you've got Katie Current, who is like Katie Couric, she's like the newsreader, and the B movie. B. Larry King, it's almost a parody of that because they actually bring it up and he's like, oh, you know, we have a Larry King in the human role as well. He has the same glasses as you. He hosts a talk show and all of that. And B. Larry King's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it's very metatextual. It's like making fun of a trope that the same studio was doing and really drawing attention to it. So that as an example of using famous film stars in your movie jumped out to me as a significant one.
Apart from the B movie, our main topic today is talking about Shrek, as I mentioned, because it's got its 20th anniversary. As you can tell there from, Sam, etc., we've, got the right people on board to join us today. It premiered on April 22nd of 2001. It's adapted actually from a 1990 picture book of the same name, but it took them all the way till 2001 to adapt it. And yeah, this is, like Sam said, this is one of the first sort of, big 3D Dreamworks movies, and which really sort of like kicked off the entire slew of films that they would later get and sort of made that sort of formula that they would sort of carry on as well as being so much a parody and referencing the Disney films, which was quite unique at the time. It was a massive film, has a lot in terms of my memories, as Sam said, because I think that's why it's interesting in terms of like a generational thing. It is almost like Disney as well of, when did you grow up with it? How did you experience it, etc. So I know for me, there's some very embedded memories of both Shrek and Shrek 2. But talking about the first film, first off, Kelly, what were your, experiences or first thoughts of Shrek? How do you think it holds up?
See, it's been on ITV a lot over sort of Easter weekend. So I caught both Shrek and Shrek 2 sort of almost back to back, separate days. And I just really realised how much I remember of it. There's so much of it that just is so quotable. And you get to a bit and you're like, oh, it's this bit. And it's almost sort of ingrained in the back of my head of like, this is Shrek and I know all of it. And you then see things in like later films or even like just later in the series of films where you're just like, oh, that comes from the first one. I can't remember when I first saw it. That's the thing. I feel like I've always known Shrek, which is bizarre. I was born in 95, so I sort of grew up. I was around the right time for both. So they almost merge 1 and 2, but 1 is particular, like I know most of it off the back of my hand.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, it's got such big memories in terms of, I'm not sure if like Craig had a similar experience, but I always remember it as one, it was one of those films that loads of kids would go and see and quoting and talking about in class and sort of saying the lines from. But I always specifically remember it as well as when you had like school shows and stuff. Like for my school, you'd have like the year 6 would be the cast, and like every other year would be just the kids who come on, do a song and walk out. And Shrek was one of the films they put on when I was in like year 3 that we watched before we went on stage, and it was basically just a class of 30 kids just reciting the film, just everyone just going like, not the gumdrop buttons, da, 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 just saying the entire film. It was a really bizarre experience that just everyone was talking along to the film. So I always remember that experience, and because it is one of those films you just see over and over again, but then somehow doesn't become old.
Yeah, I definitely share in similar experiences. Not as specific as waiting to go on stage at a school show, but I definitely my vivid memories of watching the first Shrek are in like a school hall, where your assemblies would be, just sort of watching it there with the class. I'm pretty sure that's actually the first time where I saw it, and then encouraged my parents to let me just rent it, because video rental used to be a thing. Yeah, to clarify, I was also 92, March 92.
92. And when were you born, David?
December 91.
All right, okay. So you guys are closer to me in age. So you guys will have been well familiar with the Disney Renaissance movies, right? Kelly, did you see a bunch of those movies before you saw Shrek? Like you knew what Shrek was parodying when you went in?
Yeah. I was brought up. I have like a massive Disney VHS selection, and it was just all of like the classic so I knew all the princess tropes going into Shrek, which I think helped there.
Because what really interests me is like people who like my students who I teach now, like people who started university this year, are younger than Shrek, right? Like by 2 years younger than Shrek. So I really relish the opinions of people who saw Shrek before they saw any of what Shrek was targeting, because I think it's so important to how big a deal that movie was when it came out, that it came out at the tail end of this long stretch of absolute aesthetic dominance of the whole industry by not just one company, but by one very specific kind of movie, this like fairy tale musical. And you start to get all these other studios doing it as well, diluting the formula a bit. You mentioned Anastasia early, so that's one from Fox. You had can't remember who distributed it, but The Swan Princess, and there was Quest for Camelot by Warner Brothers. Like all of these Disney Renaissance knockoffs, and everyone was so sick of it. And Shrek was it felt like a breath of fresh air, even to me as a kid who loved those movies. It was like, oh man, screw you, my favorite movie of all time, The Lion King. It's Shrek time. This is where it's at. I'm interested in how it how people receive the movie Shrek if they've never seen any of those movies, which is the case for a generation of young adults now. Because as well, Shrek's very smart because it's specifically designed to parody something that all kids know. Whereas Shark Tale, which this is in the book, Shark Tale a couple of years later, the whole pitch for that was, this is Shrek, but for mob movies. This is doing for mob movies what Shrek did for fairy tales. It's like, yeah, you know what kids love? Fairy tales. You know what kids have never seen before? Mob movies. Like, you're doing a Godfather parody for kids. It's not gonna land, man. And it didn't.
Why are you encouraging children to get into mob movies early?
Absolutely.
It's not video games we need to be worried about, it's Shark Tale.
Yeah, well, the Italian-American Anti-Defamation League were very worried about it as well, because they were like, you can put these stereotypes in movies for adults, but it's weird to be teaching kids that all Italians are gangsters.
So was there somebody at Dreamworks literally just went, you know that saying, sleeping with the fishes? Let's just make a film about that. And like, is that how they sold it? They were just like, yeah. And they were like, wait, we need one more part of this. Will Smith. Sold, you know.
It was Will Smith, Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese was in the movie, one of his only acting roles. And the fish look just like the characters. That's a freaky movie, man. It's
very strange one, yeah. I always see the Martin Scorsese when people say like, this is how he should get his Oscar and stuff, and they show the picture of his character from that film. That makes me laugh.
Martin Scorsese saying like, "Oh, you know, Marvel movies, they ain't cinema." And it's like, what? Did you watch Shark Tale? Was Shark Tale cinema?
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty bizarre. So Sam, can you like separate Shrek like from, because we've like studied it so much? Can you separate it in terms of watching it as a fan or like somebody who grew up with it to then having studied it so much?
I mean, I can remember being a fan. I can remember being a kid and watching it all the time. Like, I did have it on video. I went to see it in the cinema when it came out. I had a big Shrek poster actually above my bed. Like, I've never said that out loud before. I've never really thought about that. But when I went to bed at night, I would look up at the ceiling, and it was like a sloped ceiling. I would look up, and there would be Shrek and all the guys. Donkey, Fiona, Lord Farquaad, Dragon, the whole gang. Yeah. And I think like everybody, when you get to be a teenager, you start putting away childish things. You're like, oh, I don't care about these movies anymore. I like cool stuff like, God, what did I watch when I was like X-Men or whatever, you know, like
Blade.
Yeah, well, yeah, Blade. I think that was the first 18 certificate movie I ever watched was Blade. And it still absolutely slaps. Definitely now, I'm not going to stick on Shrek for pleasure for a while. I haven't even watched it loads. I didn't even watch it loads for the PhD. I watched it maybe twice and once with the commentary, like throughout the whole period of writing the PhD and then the book. But yeah, to be honest, it's not just Shrek. It's that whole genre of like mainstream kids CG movies. And I still watch a new one whenever it comes out for like research purposes. I need to keep up with it. But I think even like some of the more recent Pixar's, I've just kind of lost my ability to be surprised by these movies and like to enjoy them, because I've seen literally every single one that's ever been made by any studio, and I'm a bit burned out on it, unfortunately. I watched so many animated movies from like all over the world, all throughout history, and you always can still find a movie that does something that you've never seen before and gives you that hit. And now I'm just like chasing it, like the next hit, you know, like I need to see another movie that does something I've never seen before. Oh, The Mitchells versus the Machines on Netflix. Give me that. That's a great movie, by the way. If you haven't seen that, watch that.
Yeah, no, I've seen loads of hype around it. I haven't got to it yet. But yeah, I know what you mean, because I know with the Oscars, again, as much as I appreciated Soul visually and how much it was doing in terms of like music and all that kind of stuff, I was kind of rooting for Wolfwalkers, because I was like, I'm sick of Pixar just always getting it because it's just the done thing. And I was like, whereas Wolfwalkers looks really visually different, you know, that kind of hand-drawn style, etc. So yeah, I think the repetition within animation is quite a stumbling block, and that's why it's interesting with Dreamworks, because like you said, there's such a mixed bag of like, you look at the different films in which they've gone like, oh well, this worked for Shrek, and you know, so you get a lot of varying types of Dreamworks films, unfortunately. Do you sort of like rate Shrek as like a film then? You know, like how you know, what do you think of it like as, you know, do you think it is up there with the likes of Toy Story, etc.? You know,
I don't think it is. It wouldn't rank really highly. It wouldn't beat maybe the top 6 or 7 Pixar movies, maybe even top 10. I'd need to think about this properly, but it wouldn't like crack the top echelon of Pixar movies. It's a really well written movie, I will say. It's a very well like scripted and paced movie. It's like perfect 3-act structure if that's what you're going for. It does that really, really well. It's very tight. There's not much baggage, which I guess we'll compare 1 and 2 later on, but that's something that 2 doesn't exactly have. 1 is really, really tight. And it's funny, but, you know, the millionth time that you see it, the jokes obviously wear off. I think it's good. Like, you would give it 4 stars, I think. I think if you say it's less than 4 stars, you are mistaken. You've kind of bought into the hype backlash on that, because it is. And it is important. You can't get away from that. It's important.
Yeah, for me, like rewatching it as well is because I was so familiar with it, like we've all said, about those moments that we've seen throughout our childhood and throughout our lives. So in a way, this was the first time I'd sort of rewatched it properly in years without it just being in fleeting glimpses on television, etc. So I was surprised how much I did enjoy it, but in the same way that you do with the Disney film, in terms like you know exactly what you're in for. I felt that a lot of the jokes still worked, but again, it might be just sort of like my nostalgia getting in the way. But that's what I was interested in when we were saying earlier about like if you went through that Disney Renaissance era, etc. But there's also within this and the second film loads of movie references like The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, which are really specific to that time period as well. So that's, I guess, even more interesting if then people who've grown up after those movies have come out, whether they would get those references or sort of like dig the film just as much for that. What about you guys? Like Kelly, what do you think of it as just like an actual film? Like, do you think it, you know, it is up there with like the best of animation, or do you think it is still like other DreamWorks ones in which it's just still mediocre or great?
I think from a nostalgia perspective, if I was to look at like the films that like 8-year-old me really loved, it would be up there. But if I'm looking at it critically, and I'm thinking about, okay, the standard that Pixar release, even if they're sort of starting to get a little bit like, you know what's coming, they're still very well-made movies. And I think I agree with Sam, as in it doesn't really come almost close to those top 10 of like your favorite Pixar Disney movies. I don't even think it's my favorite of the DreamWorks. I really don't, because How to Train Your Dragon's up there for me. Is like what I love from DreamWorks. It doesn't quite sit exactly the same as those, but from a nostalgia perspective, every time I feel a little bit down, a little bit glum, I'm like, I can put Shrek on and I'll be happy.
I mean, I just liked the more experimental nature of the humor more than anything. I think this is something that if you're only looking at it from like a humor perspective and like what they do with the jokes and the background details. One of my favorite things to do as well is just over time just learning more and more about like hidden background detailed jokes that people would have initially missed out on, like what happened to Mama Bear. Like, what the hell? That is just beautifully dark but kind of funny. Yeah, no, I definitely enjoyed it for that, but also looking back on it, some of the humor, because it's, you know, still trying to find like its groove, is sort of subdued on the ground, so it never goes into utter realms of ridiculousness to the point of it just doesn't fit. So it definitely works well for like the story on those grounds. An interesting comparison against Shrek 2 and how I sort of view that movie. But yeah, no, I still really enjoy Shrek, even if ITV and BBC have like an absolute desire to ensure that I can see it at any given time of any given holiday. Considering before, I can't remember which Christmas it was, but there was literally a Christmas where Shrek was on BBC One, Shrek 2 was on BBC Three, and then Shrek 3 was coming up later on BBC Three.
It's like when Prince Philip died. It's a total Shrek. It's like, is Shrek died? Because it's all that's on the BBC.
Oh no, like the only death in that film would have been Fiona's father. Is that their equivalent of Prince Philip?
Just Shrek the Halls, perfectly timed for that time of year as well.
Oh, I'm not even... one of my vivid memories of like the spin-offs is like the Halloween one, where, you know, they have that set which is like the intro to essentially their version of It's a Small World After All, like the introduction to
Duloc.
Yeah, and like in this Halloween special, like they play that, but like all the characters are melting and just the sounds are horrific, and it's just they're like, and just Donkey's there horrified, and Shrek's like, wow, let's do that again. It's like, no. So I have vivid memories of that, but
in one of the Halloween specials, they did a full parody of like the Michael Jackson Thriller video, and
Jesus,
all of the deceased like characters from the Shrek universe come back to life as zombies and start. So you've got like Farquaad and like the fairy godmother and like the Frog King come back to life, and they're all doing the Thriller dance. And this year I was doing my Shrek lecture, and this one actually was in person. Not many kids in this room, not many students, but I did just start the lecture by playing the Shrek Thriller video in full, because I'm like, look, it's Halloween, let's get the party started. And then we did a little bit of an analysis of it. But yeah, I thought that opportunity could not be passed up.
I didn't know if I was getting confused with Toy Story terms. They did a Halloween one, like as they ddid that whole Toy Story of Terror. But yeah, and apparently there was several, as you guys have pointed out. So yeah, I just forgot how much they rinsed that franchise.
I couldn't tell you what the hell they're called, but they do exist.
Yeah.
It's called Scared Shrekless.
Oh,
of
God.
course.
Who would imagine having such an awful Shrek pun? Jesus Christ.
But yeah, like in terms of like the original movie as well, I think again, despite like nostalgia and stuff, like a lot of the jokes for me, I think are nostalgia based. So say the gingerbread man scene, or you know, with the whole muffin man, like that is a really clever joke. It's really good and it's played really well by, you know, John Lithgow, etc. But also at the same time, it's hard for me to judge purely because I always remember that my parents found that joke really funny as well. So I always remember even as a kid being like, oh, well, this film must be funny. Even my parents are laughing at it, you know, back in the days in which you're like forcing them to watch things like Rugrats and they're like, why do we have to watch this? You know, so if it was a film that, you know, did appeal to adults and children. But like I said, even just like the subtle things like Craig was saying about, you know, with the, you know, the mama bear, but also just funny moments in terms of like Shrek's frustration and his anger, like at the start when you have all the fairy tale creatures in his swamp. And I just love how he says that he's going to get them all out of the swamp, and then those doves just bring in like the flower cape. I don't know why, it was just something about that which was just a really subtle moment, but I just liked it for how it was just playing with the genre but not being too on the nose of like, hey, here's some dwarfs, here's you know, the dead broad on the table, as Shrek calls it. So I do appreciate a lot of those moments. I like Donkey. I think he is a really endearing character. I think that he is bordering when he can get annoying, but more so in the sequels. Whereas here, you know, I really did gravitate towards like when they're in the forest and he sings that song where he's just like, you gotta have friends. I'm not sure about you guys, but apparently like when I had it, when it was on VHS, etc., it just played as this, you know, he just sung that. But since for some reason they've put like a backing track behind that moment, like an orchestral backing track. So it kind of plays funnier because it gets interrupted by Shrek. So then the orchestra kind of like gets all like in a kerfuffle. But it's just weird every time I watch it because I'm always just like, whoa, where's this come from?
I need to rewatch that. I don't, because to be fair as well, my DVD of Shrek is like really, really old. So maybe I don't have is it like in the version on Netflix or whatever?
Yeah, I was thinking that whether it's on the Netflix version. I had it like, there is like a comparison, I think, on YouTube, or like somebody's put it on YouTube and people in the comments being like, oh, I don't remember the music being behind it. But so I don't know if that made me sort of appreciate the joke a bit more, because I was like, this is kind of funny. It's because in a way it's making more reference to Disney musicals of him being like, stop singing, because he's literally about to go into a song and dance.
I don't know, that kind of annoys me, because I think the entire thing with Donkey is he's meant to just be like sort of casual best friend annoying, not magical creature invading your life sort of.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to do that, you'd have to do that for every instance with Donkey brings into song.
He does it all the time. He does it like 6 times.
Yeah, because you've got the gotta try a little tenderness. It's like if they put music behind that, like I will be angry because it just doesn't work.
You say that I always remember one of my other VHS videos had an advert for Shrek before, like, the film, and they put the song behind that moment in the clip they used in the trailer. So that was like always embedded in my brain. But like you said, it doesn't work as well. It's just weird with it, quite frankly.
I mean, I didn't know any of those songs when I was a kid and I saw it. I still don't think I've ever heard "You Gotta Have Friends." I don't think I've ever heard the original, but I think it's Bette Midler, maybe.
Yeah, that I looked into it after, and yeah, it's Bette Midler. It's just called Friends. So.
Obviously, Otis Redding, Try a Little Tenderness is a classic now, but one of the things I find really interesting is that when you watch that movie, even if you don't know the references, and I think as a kid, there's loads of references you're not going to get in them, you know that it is a reference because it's very intrusive and it's very specific. It doesn't make sense that Donkey would just start improvising a song from out of nowhere that no one's ever heard before. Like, you can intuit that it's meant to be a reference to something, even if you don't quite get what it is. And those songs are really significant, actually, because they're one of the few instances in the first Shrek movie where it really breaks down the boundaries of what we think the world of an animated movie should be, where it's like, it's not just a song that's played, it's not just All Star playing over the top in the background, like non-diegetically. It's Donkey implicitly knows the song Friends by Bette Midler. Where did he write it in this universe, or did he like hear it somewhere? Did he overhear it? Is there a fairy tale Bette Midler, like B. Larry King, knocking about recording songs?
It's almost a bit like the Duloc song, isn't it? It's the fact that in a Disney film you would have like this welcome song, and then they like make a reference to they're potentially going to say ass, and you're like, you know, even as a kid again, you're like, oh my god, are they going to say it? And so it's almost as if then them playing with those expectations of like Disney and animation, and then even at the end you get the picture which has got their like baffled faces on it, which quite often is maybe like many adults' faces watching some of these animated films and these, you know, sing-alongs and musicals, etc.
And that's more explicit because that is tapping into Disney and criticizing Disney directly. And it's like, it's a small world after all from Disneyland as well, is what that's, and loads of things about Duloc are like satirizing Disneyland. You've got the bollards as he's coming in, and you've got the Farquaad mascot in his mask.
Yeah, I was thinking that with the Disney references, with the guy who wears the Farquaad head, I was thinking of Kelly, like your fear of like, you know, people in masks and stuff like that when we were talking about Disneyland, and you were like scared of a potential turkey lurkey like walking around.
It also fits the whole thing of the Disney parks where the villains, I think the only one that I know of who doesn't wear like a big head is the evil stepmother from Cinderella. So, like, the villains just wear the big head. So, like, for him to have, like, this Farquaad head on it made sense in my head to be like, yeah, that's why he's dressed up. And then, like, it was only later when, like, realizing that all the Disney buildings are made with weird proportions, so they look bigger. Yeah. And then the idea of Farquaad's castle being, like, it looks so tall. They've just been like, is it? Or is that another little... I mean, obviously it's a short joke, but also, like, is it then that second layer of everything at Disney looks massive? But is it? Yeah,
it's like a perspective. Yeah, that's quite interesting to think of. And it's interesting that, Sam, you mentioned with the music as well, because I think in both films, again, that really stands out in terms of, like, obviously it's quite pop culture-y to have, like, all this modern music. But I think what makes it different for me in the two Shrek films and why it doesn't work in their other sequels is especially for like, because this is partly like directed by Andrew Adamson. Like he does quite a good job of this, I think, in like his Narnia films. He has like quite some nice music in there. Obviously he's not going to play like pop music and stuff like that, but he has some kind of like nice like acoustic kind of ethereal kind of sounding songs to fit that fantasy tone. And it's almost like here, kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy, etc. They know the song to play to put you in the vibe and the tone of that scene. So like when Donkey and Shrek are going on the adventure and they've got that like Proclaimers song as they're like playing over the top, and then of course you get Bad Reputation as it plays when like he's fighting in the ring and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's again why like Shrek has succeeded in that way rather than being too sort of on the nose. So that those always stood out to me as well. And just like, I do have to give it credit for like the emotional moments that this has in terms of like Mike Myers, especially like at the end when he is saying about his fears and his emotions of, you know, being like, oh, it's a terrifying ogre, and like he's sort of like really emotional about that. You see his sort of like upset when he hears Fiona and Donkey's conversation. I think all of that like really lands, and as you guys said before, it's because it's a really clever script. It's really well paced. You sort of like introduced to the characters really effectively, and you know, you sort of grow to love them. So I think in some ways, like it's unfortunate you don't get a bit more of like John Lithgow, but at the same time, you wouldn't want to take away from Shrek and Fiona and Donkey, which is kind of like more their story, because in some ways the sequel has more of a villain emphasis than this one does. Was there any other sort of standout moments to you guys, or similar ones?
Is it just I've just had a question in my head there. Is this the best dramatic performance Mike Myers has ever given? Because I can't think of anything that would ever... Like, you know, like Eddie Murphy's been in loads of dramas. He's in like Dolomite and Dreamgirls and stuff like that. Has Mike Myers, is this like the best like emotional dramatic performance he's ever given?
Honestly,
I haven't seen Austin Powers for a while, but
yeah, well, like of course, like the love guru is probably just the bane of his life in terms of like summing up his kind of fall from popularity. So yeah, and even, if you go on his IMDb, it's like known for Austin Powers and then The Love Guru. So if he's known for The Love Guru, that's not a good sign of whether if he has any more emotional roles. But I think that's why it stood out to me when I was watching it. I was thinking it is quite brave of them in a way to hire Mike Myers, because I was thinking it's similar to Robin Williams as the genie. They were like, oh yeah, let's hire this comedic actor because they're going to be great with sort of improv, add in this voice and everything. But Robin Williams, again, had a history of being in, you know, Good Will Hunting and these sort of more emotional movies as well. So that's why I was sort of watching it, being like, oh, wow, this is actually quite impressive for Mike Myers, who doesn't have that history. So, yeah, it is surprising. But yeah, if you look at his IMDb, it pretty much is made up of Shrek. He was in Bohemian Rhapsody, but that was a kind of an unrecognizable role.
Let's not go into his role in that movie, because it was stupid. I think probably they wanted to get away with it because they thought, well, even if like the emotional stuff doesn't hit as much, we're trying to focus mostly on this sort of groundbreaking, like new take on the genre, to the point that, let's face it, they focus much more on comedy than a lot of other animated films necessarily did in that balance. So they probably were just more happy with it in that sort of sense. And it just so happened that it paid off because they were able to get a lot from Mike Myers. Following on from what David was saying, I think one of my favourite sequences in the film, just because it also made me fall in love with the song Hallelujah, was that entire sequence when Fiona then goes off to the castle and basically all the characters are like moping around. Just that entire sequence I just thought was just beautiful. Which is weird because the main thing I wanted from this film was just the sort of weird comedy. So the fact that one of the major things I just remember quite vividly is that scene where who's the singer of, because I know it's not the original version, but who sings the actual version of Hallelujah in the film?
In the film, I think it's John Cale.
Yeah.
But on the soundtrack, it's Rufus Wainwright.
Yeah, that's the confusion, yeah. So just the fact that they were able to get that out as well, I just thought was impressive. So I think that's probably my like sort of standout moment from the original.
I really enjoy, there's a scene after rescuing Fiona where they run through that sort of castle with the dragon, like following behind. I just think like it's a chase scene. We've seen them many a time. But I just think that was my first moment where I was like, oh, there's some tension here. Like there's some actual like real meat and potatoes to this. And it's something I have to be nervous about these characters actually surviving. Because obviously in that sort of bar fight almost where you've got Shrek just fighting all the guards off to bad reputation, you're like, there's enough of this film left for him to have to go on and do this. But when you get to that dragon scene, you're like, is he going to be okay? Like, this might just be my tiny little empathy brain being like, I hope everyone's okay at the end of this. But I just think it was because a lot of the time in the traditional Disney princess stories, it's princesses asleep. And then suddenly we're at a wedding.
Yeah.
You never see like the saving bit. I think the only other one that does it is like Sleeping Beauty. where you get like the actual savior, like the actual, like, we've got to fight a dragon off. So in this one, it was really nice to have that sort of refreshing take on it. Plus you get that great cover art for the DVD.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I suppose you're kind of thrown by Fiona's feelings almost, because you've gone outside of the trope. You're then like, oh, well, anything could happen. And like you said, there's a lot of fireballs like going around, etc. And something I do, quickly want to mention as well is I do appreciate that, I don't know about throughout the series, I've not seen all the spin-offs and stuff, but I did appreciate watching it again, thinking you could have easily made like, the dragon such a like cruel joke in a way that like I do appreciate that they didn't handle it in a way of being like, oh, isn't this funny? It's a female dragon, or isn't it funny that she's fallen for a donkey, etc. It was like, no, it was actually like quite a sweet, romance in a way from the very beginning. It's that interspecies relationships in Dreamworks coming up again, but I appreciated that they never made dragon like the butt of a joke, as we've seen now with many kind of like adult comedies and stuff where you watch them years later and go, ooh, that doesn't work. And it's kind of impressive that Shrek never actually went into any of those any other moments from yourself, Sam, for the first Shrek.
I mean, you guys have come up with some really good ones, and mainly thinking about these more like dramatic moments and these emotional moments, which, that is something that the movie does well. And it's probably, of the Shrek movies, and there's stuff that I like about 2 very much, which we'll get into, but it's probably the best at that, right? It's probably the best at the emotional stuff, which the whole studio almost put to one side for a little bit until we get to Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon, especially How to Train Your Dragon a little bit later on. So for me, the stuff that still stands out is the comedy. And one of the other like really significant moments in that movie, well, because for me as well, I'm thinking of what are the significant bits? What are the bits that like made this really stand out? And one of them is the magic mirror doing the dating game with Farquaad, with the princesses, and then culminating in the Pina Colada song. And it says, she likes pina coladas and getting caught in the rain. And that is one of the, it's like it's being seeded with Donkey and the songs, like this idea that this is a totally porous universe that is not trying to establish itself as separate from the real world. This is the most obvious example of that in the first movie. It's like, oh, okay, we're doing this. We're doing total anachronism, not taking this world seriously at all. We can have the dating game in the middle of a fairy tale.
Right, so we'll now get on to our discussion about Shrek 2. Just to let you guys at home know, there have been a few days that have passed between us talking about the first Shrek and now talking about Shrek 2. We've had some technical problems. We'll cover that a bit more later. But for now, we want to get on to talking about this film and carry on our fun discussion about the Shrek franchise. So Shrek 2 was released in 2004, directed by Andrew Adamson with Kelly Aisbury along with Conrad Vernon, written by William Steig and story by Andrew Adamson. You've got Mike Myers returning as Shrek, Eddie Murphy as Donkey, Cameron Diaz as Princess Fiona, along with newcomers such as Julie Andrews as the Queen, Antonio Banderas as Puss in Boots, John Cleese as the King, and Rupert Everett as Prince Charming, along with Fairy Godmother played by Jennifer Saunders. So, Kelly, I'll start off with yourself. What is your feelings towards Shrek 2 compared to the first film?
I love Shrek 2. I think it's my favourite of the bunch. It's that one that I think of when I think of Shrek. As much as like you should think of the first one because it is the first one, when it comes to like the scenes that stick in my head, it's the end of Shrek 2 where he's riding in on Donkey, and then you've got like him on the shoulder of a giant gingerbread man. No other animated film franchise has done that, and I really appreciate it. I just think it's a great time.
Yeah, because I remember you saying previously about that finale, because that's what stands out to me the most in this as well, is that while Shrek is quite a traditional sort of wrapped up, goes as you expect sort of storyline, Shrek 2 really has this great finale, even though there's lots of elements and different storylines going on throughout the film, and you kind of wonder how they're going to wrap it up, because it's only really close to like an hour and 22 minutes. So how do you feel about that just entire final sequence, especially as somebody who loves musicals and, you know, just music in general? You've got that amazing end song.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day because the fairy godmother is the only character, I think, other than Donkey, that sings. And she has these big musical numbers, which are very classic fairy tale. So she's using that almost as like, it's the distraction for Fiona to kiss Prince Charming, who's pretending to be Shrek. You've got like all of these characters coming in from different places in their own storylines to this one final culminating moment with that phenomenal song. Jennifer Saunders, who knew she had those lungs on her? And I think it's so like that costuming as well, like that sparkly red dress, and she's on the piano. Like, I just think when you look at a film's third act and how you bring all those characters together, it's one of those where I'm just like, yep, that did it really well.
Yeah, I think that's what stands out to me for Shrek 2 is that as neat and traditional as Shrek is in a way, apart from obviously its comedy, I think that it just does everything the sequel needs to do in terms of elevating the original story, adding a lot more stakes, a lot more characters. The characters who are added are really fun. You know, Puss in Boots, I think, is, great. There was a lot of chances in which that could have been a sort of tired joke, or they could have sort of gone too far with it, but I think they sort of walk that line just right. And even jokes like the hairball scene still sort of make me smile. I think it is just a really funny joke, and it's just that timing that I think that the second film has. And as I mentioned before, the soundtrack absolutely kills, because you've got that song that you've mentioned in terms of Holding Out for a Hero, but also then they end it with Living La Vida Loca, which is really fun because you get to bring in all the different characters, and even there they kind of wrap up some of the storylines within that musical number, because you kind of see that the king and queen are happy as a woman and a frog. But even then, Shrek 2 almost has an end credits scene, which was early days for those, where you've got Donkey seeing dragon and all like the donkey dragon children which come in. So yeah, there's so many musical moments in this which I love, and I think they were just ambitious and really willing to go for it in this film, because they use Funky Town when they first arrive in a far, far away. They got the scene in which Shrek is trying to get to sleep, and you've literally just got a song there singing, like I Need Some Sleep at the start, where it's got the Accidentally in Love. I just think that the songs really match the mood. You got Changes, which also comes in with the David Bowie. That's great when Shrek is transformed. So I think that they really use the story to the benefit of the music, and they also play about with the magic and the world and storytelling to their advantage. So it's quite clever in a way what Fairy Godmother does, that they're like, oh, they've taken this potion, let's make Fiona think that Prince Charming is Shrek. And that's quite a clever plan, and it leads to one of my favorite moments where the king sort of goes, Charming? And he goes, oh, do you think so? And he's just like, it's me, it's Shrek. So I think there's a lot of clever moments in it, and yeah, there's just so many memorable moments for me. Sam, what's your feelings on Shrek 2? Have you focused on that one as much, obviously studying the entire Shrek universe? Is it more about the first Shrek, or can you enjoy yourself a bit more with the second, or does it all come together at the same time?
I actually have given them both similar levels of attention in things like my book. 3 and 4 less so, but I've written on Shrek 2 at least as much as Shrek 1, because I think as we've discussed, Shrek 2 is a lot bigger and it goes further than the first one in a lot of ways, and part of that is a much higher density of jokes. It means that there's a lot more examples in that movie of the kind of thing that have become seen as being typical of Dreamworks' approach. So the celebrity voiceovers, there's a lot more of them. The intertextual, like, pop culture gags and anachronisms, there's a lot more of them. Pop songs, there's a lot more of them as well. For example, Puss in Boots is a completely, like, intertextual character in a way that, in the sense that he is totally predicated on the persona of Antonio Banderas as he was known at that point, because these days, Antonio Banderas is probably best known for being Puss in Boots, but at the time he was best known for being Zorro. And the way that the figure of Zorro and of Banderas get woven in with this new figure of Puss in Boots in this movie, obviously these characteristics aren't something that were inherent in the original Puss in Boots fairy tale character at all, means it's a really good case study for how celebrities function in these kinds of movies. So that's something I've studied at length. And in general, like I said, the movie is so much more dense with references. So part of what I did for my research on the book was count every intertextual reference in all of these movies, all the little pop culture gags and everything that pops up. And the first Shrek movie had something like 30 to 40, whereas Shrek 2 has like 90 odd, like one for every minute of screen time. It's constant. So it's almost like a Mel Brooks movie or like Airplane or something in that sense, where the gags just keep coming and coming and coming. And maybe that's at the expense of the very neat plotting and like clarity of storytelling and room for character development that the first one has. But I still think Shrek 2 is a better movie because of how much funnier and how much more vivid and bold it is.
Yeah, I guess it's willing to sort of get on board more with its kookiness and how self-referential it is, as opposed to having, like you said, having to sort of stick by the general rules and be quite sort of neat and tidy.
Yeah, and I mean, it hits some of the same notes. Like, the morals are more or less the same. Be yourself, stay true to yourself. The original fairy tale versions of what these characters are supposed to be aren't necessarily true or accurate or correct. All of these things are being subverted again. And that sense of repetition is definitely something that sets in even more with 3 and 4, which it's just a series of midlife crises for Shrek, really. He's just, in this one, he doesn't want to be a husband. And then the next one, he doesn't want to be a dad. And then the one after that, he just wants to go back to being an ogre. It's the same thing, really. He goes through the same arc over and over again. It's like, I just want to see him be happy with his life, man. I just want to see Shrek chill out and settle down.
Yeah, it's kind of like Toy Story in that way, isn't it? They have to kind of always do the typical trope of Woody, etc.
Yeah.
To be fair, you do get a lot of Shrek actually being happy with his life at the beginning of this film, because obviously when they're just showing Shrek and Fiona on the honeymoon, it is a nice sort of slice of life sort of thing you don't usually get from fairy tales, unless it's like one of the random Disney straight to video sequels which are just bad. You actually get to see them enjoying and actually just being in love, which is just a nice novelty for a story like this.
Yeah, that's true. I do like that. You get to see what Happy Ever After actually looks like for a little bit. And you get that Counting Crows song, that Oscar-nominated Counting Crows song, which I do quite like. Not as good as All Star, but pretty good.
And it's also, Shrek is a lot more laid back in this film as well. I think previously he wouldn't have attached himself to a character like Puss in Boots. The fact that Shrek is the one who's so sympathized and drawn in by the cute look, the big eyes that Puss in Boots does, and they even go to the detail of, Shrek is holding him and Puss in Boots is still doing that face after you get the typical kind of close-up shot. That to me really speaks to me that, Shrek has grown as a character. He's not just sort of like been rewinded back to the way he was at the start of the first film. He has sort of like, chilled out and laid back a lot more, but it was interesting thinking that for Fiona. I felt that I didn't know if we had as much of a character progression for her, especially considering she ended the last film kind of concerned about her appearance and being an ogre, whereas this film seemed like it was just like, yep, she's perfectly fine being an ogre now, and she doesn't seem to have any worries about her appearance, which I was kind of surprised by.
Yeah, I think Fiona as a character definitely gets short shrift as the movies go on. And again, it's because you see the same kind of plot repeated with her over and over again, because the movies are determined to make her not your typical princess. Like, she's a bit of a badass, she can do kung fu, and she can look out for herself and protect herself. But still, every single Shrek movie, she still needs to be rescued at the end by Shrek. Every single one. And maybe Shrek 2 is the least egregious of these, and Shrek 3 is probably the worst, but it's still present here. It's like, because we need Shrek to come in and save the day at the end, they don't have the courage to actually let Fiona kick the bad guy's ass in the way that they want us to believe that she can.
True, I do always enjoy it, the way she does sort of like chop like Charming sort of like neck and stuff like that. That is always fun. But ultimately, like, it's that's what makes that finale work. Is there's a nice team effort as well. You bring in, the three pigs and Pinocchio, etc. It really works in that sense as well, of bringing in the other characters, tying everything together. And I like you were saying, Sam, I think it's surprising in terms of, you were saying about Puss in Boots being reference to Zorro. Here it feels like they had a lot more the courage to do a load of these film references, and I think that where you were talking about the impact that Shrek had as a film on animation, this is definitely the example for me, even when I saw it as a kid, being like, oh wow, they're really going for the spoof nature now of like the Lord of the Rings reference, the Little Mermaid reference. There's so many different references within this film, and they're very much more, this is what we're talking about. So especially with, say, before it was kind of Disney light, whereas here they're like, we're literally spoofing Beauty and the Beast with the furniture that comes to life. And you were saying, Kelly, about Jennifer Saunders having that song at the end, but she also has that fairy godmother song where she does, again, where she almost does a Disney song of saying about, you know, making your wishes come true and all that kind of stuff, and that gets interrupted, which is interesting.
It's essentially Bibbity Bobbity Boo from Cinderella. It's very much that I'm going to transform you and make all your wishes come true kind of thing, when it's essentially what if Cinderella didn't want all that?
Yeah, exactly. What if she give her a little dog as well?
A little Prince Charles as well, a little photograph of Prince Charles, which is a nice touch.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so what about sort of like just standout comedic moments? So Craig, I know you got one in terms of their arrival in Far Far Away.
Oh yeah, just the fact that they have an entire ceremony waiting to greet them, and like one of them is just they release a load of doves and you see them flying the sort of stereotypical way, and then when you have everybody freaking out at the fact that they're ogres, one of the doves just turning their head back and slamming straight into a wall and falling down dead. It just gets me every single time, just because you have that delay of just like the splat in the wood and the cut back to them, and then
yeah, and just when I was rewatching it as well, is the baby cry. That's just the kind of comedic timing that really makes it work as well, is when it's all silent and you hear like a baby crying in the distance. But even before that, the flipping back and forth between the conversation of ending each other's sentences with the parents and Shrek and Fiona, I think is really, really clever. And like I said, that finale sort of gets me every time. That's a big one for me. And it's kind of why I also appreciate about this is that even though it's more referencing a lot of movies and a lot of Disney, there's still an element of existing within its own world, because there's a lot more emphasis on the fables and the lesser known fairy tales, because the fact that Puss in Boots isn't a character that is in any Disney film, and there's a lot of characters within this which aren't. You know, they have a joke at one point when they're going up the red carpet before the big ball, where they go, oh, it's Tom Thumb and Thumbelina, and they get swept into like a dustpan. I was just like, well, that's not really referencing anything, so I kind of appreciate that that's a joke that works on its own merits without being a reference to something else.
One of the standout moments for me, one of the standout gags that I focus on a lot when I give lectures on Shrek is in the Puss in Boots, it's just before the Puss in Boots sequence where Shrek and Donkey have gotten lost and they know that they're walking around in circles because Donkey goes, there's that bush that looks like Shirley Bassey. And it cuts to a bush that is shaped like the singer Shirley Bassey. And that fascinates me because it doesn't really make sense as a joke. Like, it doesn't really follow any of the established rules of comedy. Like, if you read like the history of comedy theory and why people laugh at things, that doesn't fit into anybody's conception of how that works, but it is still funny. Because it's like, who's the butt of the joke here? What's being made fun of? What's being laughed at? Is it the joke isn't that Shirley Bassey looks like a bush. You know what I mean? There's no connection there. It's not like when they're talking about a handsome prince and then they show a picture of Prince Charles, because that's ironic. No offense to Prince Charles. Shirley Bassey's bush, so to speak, doesn't fit into that. So my theory is that is part of this wider mockery of the idea of a coherent animated world. It's the idea that, okay, so yeah, this is a movie that's got Far, Far Away, but it's basically Hollywood, and it's got TV shows, and it's got like entertainment reporters and things. And also Donkey knows who Shirley Bassey is for literally no reason. Don't try and think about it too hard. It's just making us laugh because it's holding up this kind of movie, this fairy tale movie, which we expect to be fairly straightforward and self-contained based on what we know from Disney, and constantly poking at that and pushing through that fourth wall.
Shrek 2, you know, is a film that we've already sort of celebrated and put into the movie vault when we were talking about Dreamworks in a previous episode. We were saying how it's a good example of an animated sequel and it stands out as one of the overall Dreamworks films. But because this is, our place in which we sort of celebrate films that should be looked at in terms of a historical point of view and an enjoyment or quality aspect, would you agree then, Sam, that the first Shrek also needs to go in because of what it's done in terms of influence in animation, as well as just being, a good watch as well?
I think so. I think it's very culturally significant and it is fun enough to rewatch. Like, people still enjoy watching it. I mean, I'd be interested to know what, like, a Gen Z kid who maybe didn't grow up with it thought watching it for the first time, and also being a generation removed from most of the pop culture references there, and with the added baggage of mainly knowing Shrek from the internet memes, which don't necessarily always reflect his character accurately. I think Shrek could definitely sue some of those guys for defamation based on the things that they have him doing in some of these internet memes, right? So if that's where you're coming to it from, I don't know how much you would enjoy the movie. Younger children have been raised on a diet of very postmodern comedy, which has been created by a generation of people who did grow up on things like Shrek and on The Simpsons and on SpongeBob. So maybe a kid today wouldn't see Shrek as being as radical as we saw it when we were younger. But yeah, so I don't know if you could say that it would be an objective success for anybody, but I think it holds together very well. Scott Tobias of The Guardian would disagree.
Damn it, I was literally about to make that joke.
So into the movie vault goes the first Shrek, joining Shrek 2 in there. And yes, hopefully in the future, perhaps we'll talk more about the third and fourth film. But for now, usually this would be the section in which we have our end game. But as I mentioned earlier, we've had some technical issues with this episode. So we are now here after our end game many days later, and we can only reflect on the end game because we don't want to put our guests or even myself, spoiler, guys, I was in the end game. I flew the entire thing. I didn't need Kelly at all. I was just that good. No, I'm joking.
Okay, I'm going to take over. As this is my segment, I'm going to take this over now because David's talking too much.
Craig could be the storyteller. Storybook opens far away.
Yeah, so I want it known that I've had to break a couple of walls in my house out of frustration of what happened to this endgame. Purely because this was one of the most imaginative endgames that I had planned, and even on the day itself, it didn't completely go to plan because usually after the movie vault, everyone would shut up and then I would take over. But no, instead, David was like, let's talk about extra things to do with Shrek. So we had Kelly was telling us about the wonderful but creepy Shrek the Musical, which then came up loads of times in the musicals quiz I did Tuesdays later. Haunting. We heard about what was the attraction you were telling us about, Sam? The
Shrek's Adventure on the South Bank.
Yeah. So we were hearing about Shrek.
Complete nightmare world.
We were hearing about that, and then we were talking about the DVD extras on such as Far, Far Away Idol, and what nobody knew that the endgame was going to be based off of Shrek in the Swamp Karaoke Dance Party. Now, the best setup to an endgame we ever had, because before anyone knew that this endgame was going to be about that, Sam was very confidently saying, I can remember every song in that feature, didn't you, Sam?
Yeah, I was fairly confident that I could, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Spoiler, he did not. At that point, he's listing off every song except for one. And David and Kelly just sat there just like, wow, this is impressive. But in the back of their minds going, I think there's one more that has not been mentioned. I'm not going to mention it. It doesn't. I'm sure it won't be relevant. And then the end game comes up, which is I was going to show them the entirety of Shrek in the Swamp. And they were going to answer observational questions on it. But given that happened, I did it the other way around. I got them to answer the questions first, and then we watch it as a reveal. Yeah, so I'll hand over to you guys now.
So I didn't get them all. Like a classic Disney villain, I was undone by my own arrogance and forgot, I believe, who let the dogs out.
It was indeed. Because you know what? We got you monologuing. And you gave us the answers. bar one. And my brain was just like, yep, that's it.
So we literally did an Incredibles. We got, like Syndrome. You got me, man.
Yeah, you sly dog. Unbelievable. So I've now got those tattooed on my hand.
So for anyone who wants to try and play along, the 5 questions that we asked were this. Which character is DJing throughout the entire dance party? What instruments are the 7 dwarves playing in the background? What is the name of the executioner? A true or false? Mama Bear doesn't appear in the entire thing at all because she's in fact been turned into one of Lord Farquaad's rugs. And then finally, how many songs feature in the dance party in total? Bonus point if you can say the name of the song and who is singing it. In the end, these final scores were a triumphant 20 points to Sam and David and Kelly having 23. I would say that we put David and Kelly together as a team against Sam on his own because of the idea of power balance. Sam being an absolute expert on Shrek to the point that even outside of this, I've seen his name popping up on my Facebook news feed every now and then, which has been a cool sensation, even if you've had to be, doing the good fight and fighting off idiots and their moronic views on films. Against David and Kelly is more of a balance, and because of that, as well as what was the other question that you got?
I think it was the Mama Bear one I got wrong. Oh, and then we got the dwarfs wrong as well.
Oh no, that's it. Because they had the correct number of songs, and then
so that's your extra point.
That's where they got the 3. So everything else was even. So it was literally that one song. It was a great moment that no one will be able to hear.
There's got to be some. I'm thinking of Disney's. We're talking about animation and Disney rip-offs, etc. Is it like Disney's Gigantic or something? It's like if you wanted to see that film, then it's lost for the ages. It's like this Endgame. If you wanted to hear that, if that sounded fun, sorry guys, it's gone. I know, Sam. Is there another animation project that's more relevant?
I was just thinking of the scene from The Simpsons where Bart and Lisa miss an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, then they turn it on and Krusty's going, "Wow, they'll never let us show that again, not in a million years."
Yeah, that's how Craig should have started this Endgame segment.
I'm just trying to think. At least the format of this game is one that I can just use for an Endgame special because nobody will have done it. And for anyone who hasn't listened to this episode, which spoiler, a lot of our guests don't tend to actually listen to our podcast because they're kind of traitorous like that. It would at least come off as novel.
Very true, very true. Well, yeah, it was a fun Endgame, guys. Regardless, it was still it was one of those lockdown quizzes when we still had fun with it. But I guess not all lockdown quizzes were broadcast to everybody, so we still have the memories and we're still able to tell everyone about it. And like I said, we're able to come back together a few days later when there's been more discourse about Shrek. If people don't know, there's been that Guardian article that we referenced earlier, which says the Shrek isn't funny. And which I also tweeted about. We were talking earlier about the Shrek spin-offs. What must that guy think about Shrek the Halls and Scared Shrekless?
Yeah, stick him in the Shrek's Adventure, stick him in the Maze of Insanity, which if you don't know because it got erased, is a hall of mirrors in the Shrek Adventure where when I was there a child got lost and it was implied to be a regular occurrence.
Oh God.
Not permanently lost. They found them a few minutes later, but it was long enough for me to panic that I would never leave the Maze of Insanity.
And that kid grew up to be an article writer for The Guardian, and he vowed to have his revenge.
But Sam, you've kind of responded to that with an article in the Independent. Is that right?
Yes, it was a tight turnaround, but I managed to get it out. Managed to get it out there within 24 hours, and not as many people read it because people only click on things that they don't want to read, it turns out. And that's how the internet works. You do hot takes for hate clicks, but I think a lot of people were happy to have that riposte from an expert,
Exactly, yeah. Well, like I say, we're all about positivity here, Sam, so we're glad to have you on, defending Shrek. And thank you for both joining us again. Like I said, we had fun both times. There's some treasures that we've lost along the way, but we've still got the memories.
Like a child in the maze of insanity.
Yeah, we can still go enjoy, Shrek's karaoke or Far, Far Away Idol, in which I think I mentioned the horrifying image of a CGI Simon Cowell. So there's that too, but I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about the weird spin-offs and all of that in the future. So yeah, thank you once again, guys. Kelly, where can we catch yourself?
Yeah, so I'm mostly active over on Twitter at the minute. So I'm at Kelly Lou Bishop, and we're talking all sorts of fun things at the minute. I'm basically just replying to anyone and everyone. It's great fun. So much so that a lovely Jason Derulo meme popped up of him having his new son, and Niall, who I don't know whether he's been on, but he definitely writes for Fresh Take, wrote that he had named his son Rum Tum Tugger after his rolling cats, to which you just have to jump in and say that kid's going to be a curious cat.
Yeah, Niall just uses any chance he can to put cats into any tweet or pop culture reference, basically.
Absolutely.
So so go check out Twitter if you want to see a lot of that madness, or just check out freshtakehub.com, where you can see Kelly and Niall's writing, where they have got their hot takes, such as Niall talking about Mortal Kombat and Kelly going through Promising Young Woman. Sam, tell us all about where you can catch yourself in terms of the stuff you've recently written, and Disneyversity as well.
So my podcast, which I do with Empire Magazine and Empire Podcasts, Ben Travis, is called Disneyversity. That's DISNI Versity, right? We had it spelled out both ways on the logo, and we picked the one that looked most aesthetically pleasing. That's where we'll go through every Disney movie in order and talk about their history and their legacy and do a little bit of analysis. And, considering how much students pay to attend my lectures in university, you're really getting it at a bargain price there. What else do? I tweet at Sam Summers 0, Sam Summers and then the number 0 on Twitter, obviously. And at the minute, that's just, like, for the last few days and probably the next few days, that's just a hub for all the various Shrek stuff that I've been putting out this week. So you can find, like, my article for The Independent and other interviews that I've done tweeted out there, and also information about upcoming Shrek projects that I'm going to be a part of. And I'll probably start tweeting about other things very soon. And I also tweet from the Disneyversity account and the Disneyversity Instagram page with images and concept art and facts about those movies as we'll go through them.
Yeah, so it was fun stuff. I still always enjoyed that one about, was it Saldos Amigos, or one of those with like the image of Donald on the like women's dancer bodies, and I was just like, what is this film? I was like, I need to go back.
Yeah, that's from the Three Caballeros,
yeah.
One of the most underrated Disney movies of all times. Check that out on Disney Plus, and then listen to our podcast about it.
Yeah, it's a great time. Yeah, and you can catch ourselves at Well Good Movies as well on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. You can catch us on our website, freshtakehub.com/wellgoodmovies. Please let us know what you think of the Shrek movies and any of the other Dreamworks projects. Let us know about the bee movie, which we were talking about before. Would you marry a bee? Have you seen a bee and thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind, getting married to them? What do you think about this entire Shrek discourse? Sam, I know you previously said as well that you've got like a Shrek symposium, and you're kind of hoping that because this is the anniversary year, you'll put Shrek to bed. But I don't know, the way this stuff is going, I'm not sure if you're ever going to escape it now.
Yeah, I think that the discourse has given me another few years trapped in the maze of insanity with Shrek. I've been thinking, like, I've done so well these last few weeks by being the world expert on a movie that happens to be having its 20th anniversary. I'm just going to pick a movie that came out in like 2004 and spend the next 3 years writing about nothing but that, and then come that time I will be raking it in again.
You don't actually know this, but you got trapped in that maze of insanity, which is talking about Shrek for all time. And you
never left. I'm still there, yeah. The coronavirus was all just a maze of insanity dream.
Anything lastly from yourself, Craig?
Well, David wanted me to end the episode originally by saying Shrek is love, but then Kelly and I had to explain to him what Shrek is love actually is. And then he's just like, oh, I've been using this as a hashtag for all of our media. And I'm like, yeah, you might not want to have done that, David.
My naivety. My eyes.
Instead, I'm just going to go with... I mean, I ended the last one by saying, in the morning I'm making waffles. I actually did. I probably can't promise to do that again, so... Bye, everyone!
Thank you for joining us, guys. Please do join us on our next episode and check out all the great stuff on Twitter. Like I said, check out Disneyversity with Sam and his recent independent article as well, and check out all the stuff that we got from Kelly on our website, and we look forward to chatting with you on our next episode. Thanks again. See you later.
Bye.
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 It's getting late. I'm going to go to bed soon, purely because in the morning, I'm making waffles. Because somebody had to do it, right? Somebody just, we'd not mentioned it in the entire episode. Somebody had to do it. And it's mine.